for being here. My name is Shirin, and I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, Huma. Hi, Huma.
Hi, Shireen. Hello, everybody. How are you
Thank
doing
you.
today,
It's
Shireen?
great to be here with you today. And today we will focus on digital lessons in low resource context. We know teaching with technology comes with both opportunities and challenges, and today we'll explore practical ways to make the most of it together, even when resources are limited. And before
Mm.
we begin, please drop a quick comment in the chat and tell us your name, where you are joining from. We would love to hear from you. And let's start with everyone with a quick question. What do you think, Huma? I'd like to ask you and everyone else. Have you ever been in a situation where technology failed during a lesson? Maybe the internet dropped out, project work, a projector wouldn't work, or your device went blank. Has this ever happened to you?
Oh, plenty of time, plenty, of times, Shireen. Of course, yes. I think when we talk about technology, it can be tricky, unpredictable, whether it's a high resource context or a limited resource context. I think, this goes unsaid that we always need to be prepared, and sometimes also prepare for the worst, or expect the worst. So yes, I mean, there have been so many situations where I've had to, work or teach a lesson where technology has failed or my computer didn't work or the projector could not be switched on. So I think, I mean, this reminds me, of the ideas from module 1, of our course, integrating digital technologies, that when we plan our lessons, I think it's always important to consider, what are those unexpected problems or challenges, that you could face during the lesson. I think it's nice to be prepared. So today, Shireen and I are going to use a lesson plan from the Teaching English website. It's a secondary lesson plan about animals, herbivores and carnivores, that you can use and adapt for different contexts and situations. And we're going to use this lesson plan as a springboard for talking about technical challenges that we might face in our own teaching in our classrooms, and how we could actually, navigate those challenges. So together with you, we're going to brainstorm some solutions today. So Siren, what about you? What do you think? What should be the first step, when we walk into our classroom and we find, a technology failing?
Yes, this is the first one of the first things also we covered in the course is the digital divide. So we need to know first of all our students whether they have access to digital technology or what kinds of technologies we have access to. As our community members also mentioned, anything might happen anytime with technology.
Mm.
It doesn't matter where we are. Even recently, last month, there was an electricity cut in Spain. So
Yeah.
it's really not about being in a high resource or low resource context. This might happen anytime, anywhere. Of course, sometimes we have more access or less access. So we need to know our context first. And there are also some um, questions shared in the module, and our community members also have made some suggestions. So starting from the lesson plan, Huma, can you tell us about this lesson plan and how would you introduce it to the learners in your?
Okay, that's a great question, Sarah Shireen. Sorry I interrupted you. Yeah, actually, so this lesson plan that we're talking about, you'll find the link in the comments. So for the audience that's just joining us, we're going to use a lesson plan from the Teach English website. It's a secondary level lesson plan about animals, carnivores and herbivores. And the lesson starts with a sorting activity where learners have to classify animals into carnivores and herbivores, and the teacher also uses visuals using PowerPoint. So how can we adapt this activity, use this warmer without a projector or the internet in the classroom?
That's a
So
very
if
good
you're watching
question.
us, Yes, so if you're watching us, tell us what would you do? How would you adapt digital warmers in your context or another low tech or no tech classrooms where there is perhaps only one main computer and maybe no projector or there is no access to internet. So what would you do? So
Mhm.
Shireen, let's start with you. What would you do, Shireen?
Okay. So first I would think about my learning outcome. So for this warmer, what would I want my student learners to achieve? So I would want them to differentiate between those animals, put them in the
Mm,
right categories so that know the pronunciation, how to pronounce names of those animals and which category they belong to. So immediately, I would come up with some activity ideas to be able to reach my learning outcome. Of course,
mm,
technology makes it easier because it's visual, but if we don't have this technology, we can use some other resources like our body language or our images that we can draw on the board. Students love drawing. I'm not very good
mm.
at, but or miming, describing animals. So these can be easily done with the help of our creativity. So, for example, you can draw simple images on the board, ask students to draw, and or students can mime and describe the animal, and then others guess.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, these. What other ideas can you come up with?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I'd like to, turn this into a game, Shireen. So we were talking about it earlier, and one of my favorite games, that I like to use in my class is "What am I?" or "Who am I?" Well, so students, describe, the object or the animal, or the person, and their partner has to guess, what that is. So Shireen, I mean, let's have a go at it. Are you ready, Shireen?
Okay,
So,
let's
so
go.
Shireen, I'm going to describe my favorite animal to you, and you have to tell me what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm a mammal. I live in forests and grasslands. My body is covered with fur. I have four legs. I hop, and I love carrots.
Okay, so then it's rabbit.
Oh yes. So Shireen, is this a carnivore or a herbivore?
I think it's a herbivore, as far as I know, right?
Of
And
course, Sharon. So that's something that our students can do too, because students know animals, so they can think of their favorite animals, describe them for each other, guess them, like you said, using their body language, mime them, or simply, describe them, and then they guess what those animals are, and then classify them into
yes.
herbivores or carnivores. Shirin, we got some lovely ideas coming in the chat. We got people joining from Algeria, from Brussels, from Ghana, from Ethiopia, and some of them are saying, why not use songs, miming, role plays, and like you said, get them to draw as well. And there's another idea about creating a story and doing posters. I mean, that's
Mhm.
lovely. That's quite interesting.
Very
Um,
nice ideas, really. The guessing games and then mind maps are really very helpful.
mm,
We can use our existing resources so we can use the board, our learners, so drawing, student learners drawing, us drawing, using columns. Maybe we can ask them to move to the corners of the class. So
oh
this
yes.
can be another way to categorize, so we can use their TPR in a way. Yes, so imitating the movements of animals, imitating, yes, that would be a very nice guessing game. So yes, then
Mm,
we would reach our learning outcomes. Then yes, we can then move on to the next stage in our lesson plan. Huma, what is the next activity then?
Okay, so Shirin, before we do that, can we please look at one other comment from our audience? So one of them is suggesting flipping the classroom, which I think is a very good idea. I mean, you can
Mhm.
get your learners to, maybe some learners have access to devices and technology at home, then maybe those tech users, will be able to work on the activity. But Shirin, that brings up a very important question. Then we've been talking about digital divide as well. So what happens when some learners have access to technology at home or in the classroom and others don't? What do we do then, Shirin? Because there was also a question from one of our community community members who asked that they want to use Kahoot and Bluecat quizzes, these, review, games, these platforms for reviewing lessons in their classroom, but they cannot because students don't have access to mobile phones. So what can we do here, Shirin? Because we're talking about warmer, so I think this is quite relevant for us to discuss.
Mhm. Again, for Kahoot type of exercises, in which ideally we would need all students, all learners to have, but if not, that's not the end of the game. We can use printed question slips and
Mm.
turn it into a game using mini whiteboards. We can even do our own mini whiteboards with a
Oh
paper.
yeah.
They can hold cards and to show the answers, or they can stand up so we can prepare multiple choice questions. We can read the question or write the question, and then learners stand up or sit down to show their answers. Or we can again place the corners like A, B, C, D, and then they can run to the corners to show their answers. Or as it's mentioned in the comments, this flipping idea can also be very helpful. We can give the code. These games have codes. Our learners can use their parents' devices if that's available. But yes, depending on the questions, the context, that we need to ask those questions from module one again. Can all my learners access the resources equally?
Mm.
Do any of my learners need extra support? What kind of extra support might they need? How can I offer that support? So these are the questions we need. I mean, it's all about planning, I think, in the end, knowing about our context, planning, and making sure that all our learners have access to the game in one way or another. So if we have more resources or less resources, we can use, I think, imagine you might be a teacher with access to all resources, but if you don't have creativity, then if you can't use these resources creatively, then it doesn't
Mm.
really matter. I think it's about us, how we make use of our own resources, including the learner, teacher, our creativity.
Okay, Shirin, I really like your idea about of using the corners, because that's something that I do, quite often in my classroom. So Shirin was talking about, the answer corners, where you put A, B, C in the different corners of your classroom, and you show a question, and if the answer is A, then students run to that corner. If the answer is B, and then they justify their responses to each other. So
Mm.
that's a very good way of using learners as a resource. So we're talking about using your learners as a resource as well. Another thing is, why not get your students to create those quiz questions themselves, and they can, quiz each other. Again, you're using your learners as a resource, evaluative questions that students can come up for each other. So there are so many different ways, of simulating Kahoot and Bluecat and quizzes and all the other, games that are available to us, even in low or limited resource contexts. Okay,
Definitely.
Shireen, I know I haven't forgotten your previous question. So going back to our lesson plan about carnivores and herbivores. So in this lesson, the warmer, as we talked about, is a sorting activity, and then the teacher plays a BBC video about herbivores, where students watch this video clip, and then they have to answer some questions. So they practice listening for specific information. So what can
Mm.
we do if audio fails? How can we teach listening lessons or video lessons with no access to technology, and if you're using recorded text? So yeah, that's the question there. So how can we do a meaningful listening or video lesson when tech fails? So if you're watching us, please tell us in the comments. Shireen,
Mhm.
how about you?
Well, firstly, I think I always prefer pre-recorded videos rather than relying on
Mm.
school's internet connection, because this
Oh yeah.
always, in my case, in my experience, it failed most of the time. So instead of pausing, I downloaded those videos, and then I also prefer those downloaded transcript and printed transcripts for myself, so that I can be prepared to um, repurpose this activity in a way that will help me continue the lesson without panicking. So this is the first thing I do. So we can maybe We can, well, if it's listening, we can use that transcript then in creative
Yeah.
way, right? And again, flipped approach might work, but this also takes time for learners to learn this approach. If you give the link to the students, learners, and
Mm.
ask to watch beforehand, if you don't do it um, periodically, they need to get used to this delivery or learning method as well. They it might take time. Or if we are prepared with the transcript, we can use some creative activities with that transcript. You had some ideas, right? So what was the first one? Would you like to share?
Oh, yeah. Yes, of course, Shirin. I mean, we were talking about using jigsaw listening. That's something that I do with my learners, with or
Mhm.
without technology in the classroom. So if you have the transcript with your, if the student, if the course books, the student textbooks have the audio script, then what you could do is give one part of the text to each group, so different parts of the text to different groups, and then they read that part silently, and then they summarize that part to the other group. So it's jigsaw listening.
Mhm.
And I think it's a great activity for getting learners to engage with the text by themselves first, and then, collaborating with their colleagues. So it also helps them to work on their skills of summarizing and paraphrasing. And
Perfect.
the other idea is you could also use dictogloss. I think that's another favorite activity of mine, whether or not there is technology in my classroom. So the teacher could be the audio or the speaker. Well, or you could also get the strongest student from your class to come to the front. So the first time you read the text at normal speed, and students listen without making any notes to get, the general idea of the text. And the second time you read the text slowly, and this time students make notes. They write down keywords or phrases or anything, that's surprising or catchy for them, and then they work in groups to reconstruct the text together, and then they can go back and compare their reconstructed text with the original transcript. So that's dictogloss. So that's another activity that you can get your students to do if you have no access to technology, but you've got, the recorded, the transcripts with you. So those are a couple of things, Sharon, that I like doing
Mhm.
in my classes.
Very nice. I just thought, for example, if we had access to the transcript before the lesson, we can ask AI
Mm,
to prepare. Maybe if our learners are at a lower level of English,
mm,
ask AI to simplify it with some questions. So if technology fails, we can at least read that video story and pause at certain points to ask questions to our learners. So we can also use AI to help us summarize the transcript. So just to take some actions before the lesson so that we can continue without any interruptions. But if anything happens, these ideas that you have shared also help us reach our learning outcomes. I think this needs to be our main goal. Without panicking, we need to reach our learning outcomes. So some other ideas: running dictation.
mm.
There,
Oh, yeah, that's lovely.
Simon says the odd one out, part of the text hidden in the classroom somewhere. Wow, how beautiful these ideas.
I know. Yeah, I love them, Shireen.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean, running dictation, I think that again, TPR, kinesthetic as well. So you then try and, address the different needs, the physical needs, that you may have in the classroom. But also, I think we're also talking about accessibility and inclusion here. So at one time, you may have to address those physical needs that learners have, because there might be learners who might want to engage in physical activities. But then again, there might be learners who can't engage, in these activities. So I think it's also important to make them accessible. So one of the ways you could do is have roles, so learners who can, then perhaps that person is the runner, and the other person, is the writer or the scribe. So again, have roles, to address different physical needs in your classroom when you conduct TPR, or kinesthetic activities.
Yeah, that also answers the question: how will you make your lesson
Mm,
differentiated and scaffolding? Scaffolded, yes, by thinking about these. Of course, we cannot guess everything that would happen, but at least if we had an maybe a pause before we plan our lessons about what
Mm.
would happen and about anticipated issues that might happen if we are going to use video or listening material. Then we would maybe repeat some of these exercises, activities in all lessons when technology fails or if some of our learners don't have access. So there are, let's summarize these, let's keep adding these to this thread, and then we will have a bank of ideas by the end of this week. So about what.
Shireen, that reminds me, I mean, going back to this question about differentiation, that also reminds me about a post that went up in our community last week or a week ago, I suppose. It was about digital inclusion. And there's this, 4 or 5 step framework that the course talks about. I think module 2 of the course, Integrating Technologies course, talks about digital inclusion. And the framework suggests that the first step is, when you choose a lesson, you analyze your lesson, and then you think about your learners' needs. So you look at the lesson and you think about, oh, maybe I have planned this warmer, but what about my learners? How many of my learners have access to phones in the classroom? Can they use phones, for example? And maybe there are learners who are very fluent, perhaps there are those who are good readers, and then there are those learners who perhaps struggle with listening. So I think choosing a lesson, analyzing your learners' needs, and then planning for not just differentiation. The module also suggests personalization, which
Mm,
means you also bring in your learners' lives into the lesson by personalizing the context. So I think that's a very good framework from module 2 of our course. And I think that answers this question about how can you make your lessons differentiated and more scaffolded. The other thing is, Shane, I think we talked about using transcripts earlier, but I think it's also important, if you're using technology, to make sure that the technology is screen reader friendly.
mhm,
And maybe there are options, of using text to speech and speech to text software for users, for those with hearing impairment and with vision impairment, or with hearing impairment. I think that's important. Also, I think pacing, I think we need to provide flexible deadlines, because some learners might be quite enthusiastic about using technology, but some might be nervous or anxious.
mhm.
So I think providing flexible deadlines and different formats, for output, written, spoken, audio and video. So I think those are also different ways of differentiating, your lesson content.
Exactly. Very, very great ideas. These are really very helpful, very practical. I think it's really important to know about learners' needs. As you say, they can also help us if they have any accessibility needs, how we can help them. We can talk to them about how we can make it easier for them. And I totally agree with you. We need to really plan these in advance and integrate these into our lesson plans. And progress takes time, especially when building digital skills. We need to really know our goals and keep the instructions simple, step by step. We can also buddy our learners, they can help
Oh
each
yeah.
other. And yeah, we also, if we have, for example, rotating groups, if
Mm,
we not all learners have access to mobile phones, if we have only 2 or 3, then we need to rotate the groups. Then we need to have clear expectations, class rules around, especially around device use or behavior. So because we really want to plan how learners move between tasks or groups or stations. So we need to
mm,
keep those groups small, roles clear, instructions clear. So it's all about practicing. Of course, some things may go wrong. We can again reflect on these and do it again. But peer teaching is also very helpful. We can let digital
yes, of course.
learners to support others, and I think we can, I mean, pedagogy leads technology, so we can always do things offline as well. Brainstorming, planning, drafting can happen offline, and then some of these tasks can move to tech tools only and if when available. So it's Not always we have to use digital technology, of course. We need to keep our learning goals, learning outcomes in mind at all times. Any final remarks, comments, Huma, before we say goodbye?
Shireen, I think we got some time for a final question, because if we go back to the lesson plan that we've been talking about, I think in the lesson, the teacher then introduces some verbs with out, for example, outnumber, outweigh, for making comparison, where students, compare, the different animals and talk about them using these verbs with out. And the final activity is that they have to research more animal facts, and then they
Mhm.
have to present it to the class, using these verbs without. So Sirin, the last question for our audience would be, well, how can we help students do these digital research projects with limited or no tech in the classroom or at home?
So again, I think this flipped approach can really
Mm,
help. They can do, or teacher or one student with the device can do or share the findings in a jigsaw or poster task. Others may add questions related to the facts, because by the end of the day, the purpose for the research is to learn more about the topic. How can we do it? So we can
yeah.
encourage research in which students, learners will interview each other, maybe, or other teachers, other classes, family members. So we can assign small parts of research as homework for those with access at home, and then they can those bring everybody, like puzzles can come together in class, and then
Mm.
we can combine them. So yeah, any other ideas
Um,
you
yeah,
want?
actually, Shirin, I'd like to add something there, because we were also, because from the community there were some questions where teachers wanted to know what happens when some students have access to devices at home and some do not. That digital divide. Again, going back to that point, I think one of the ways we could deal with that is, of course, the flipped approach that you mentioned, and others, the live audience have done too. I think we could assign roles, so the tech users could be researchers because they
Yes.
have access to technology, and there could be other roles as well. For example, the note takers, there could be designers, there could be timekeepers, there could be presenters, because you want someone, to present this information to the class. So you could have roles, that students could choose, that they could take on depending on the access to resources that they have, so everybody feels included at the end of the day.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a brilliant idea. I actually did something similar. Again, it's about including, making sure all
Mm,
learners feel part of the task
yeah.
and contribute according to their strengths. And we can also provide some challenge to these roles so that they can also challenge themselves. Thank you so much, Huma, for these lovely and very practical hands-on ideas. And thank you everybody who have contributed in the comments. We look forward to learning more from you all.
Yes, thank you, Shireen, and thank you, Philippa and Chris, for helping us in the background. And thank you very much to the audience for coming today. Let's keep the conversation going in the comments in the community. We'll see you online. You have a good rest of the day. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
How to find and join groups for teachers. From our Teaching English page on Facebook, tap About. Go down the page until you see Groups. Then tap See All. Tap the name of a group to learn more about it. You must ask to join private groups before you can access them. Read carefully and provide any requested information. Read the group rules. Confirm that you agree to them. Then tap Submit. Popular posts from your groups will appear in your newsfeed. Tap on the name of a group to go there. Or access all your groups by tapping on your profile. Groups. Then choose which group to explore.